Welcome, sleepy traveler. You've arrived at a quiet space made just for you. My name is Valarie, and I am here to guide you gently into rest, to help ease your mind, soften your body, and drift you toward a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. Whether your day was long or your thoughts feel a little too loud tonight, let this be your permission to slow down, to breathe, and to simply be. There's nothing more to do now. Just allow my voice to be your guide as we begin this gentle journey toward deep, nourishing rest. If you're new here, subscribe for sleep content like this, and like this video if you find it enjoyable. Let's begin. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it out gently, feeling the air flow out of your body with ease. Allow your lungs to empty completely and notice the sense of lightness that follows. Inhale softly again, filling your chest and belly with calm. And exhale slowly, letting the last remnants of the day drift away. You are here now, in this moment, and that is all that matters. Feel the surface beneath you, holding you fully and without effort. Your body does not need to hold itself up anymore. Notice the gentle heaviness of your arms and legs. They are ready to rest, to soften, to be still. There is no rush and no expectation, just quiet. Bring your attention to your face. Let your forehead soften, smoothing away the lines of the day. Your eyes grow heavy, safe behind your closed eyelids. Release the tiny muscles around your cheeks and nose. Allow your jaw to unhook, your lips to gently part. Even your tongue rests lightly, free from tension. Your whole face is calm and serene now. Take another gentle breath. And shift your awareness to your neck and shoulders. Notice if they are holding on to any tightness. And with your next exhale, let them sink and release completely. A warm heaviness flows from your shoulders into your upper arms. Through your elbows, your forearms, and into your hands. Your fingers rest effortlessly, soft and loose. Your chest rises and falls gently as you breathe. Each inhale brings fresh comfort. Each exhale carries away the last threads of tension. Your heart beats slowly and steadily, a soft rhythm of calm. Bring this awareness to your stomach and your lower back. Let your belly soften and expand as you breathe in. And gently contract as you breathe out. Your lower back sinks into the surface beneath you. Supported, safe, and completely free to let go. Now notice your hips and thighs. Feel the weight of your legs resting heavily. Your muscles are releasing with every breath. Your knees, calves, and shins are soft and relaxed. Your ankles and feet loosen, each toe free of effort. From the top of your head to the tips of your toes, your body is at ease. Imagine now a soft golden light appearing just above your head. It glows with warmth and peace, surrounding you in safety. Slowly, this light begins to drift downward, touching the crown of your head. Where it touches, it releases tension, replacing it with comfort. The light moves across your forehead, over your eyes, your cheeks, and your jaw, down into your neck and shoulders, melting away the last bits of strain. It glides along your arms to your wrists and finally into your fingertips. Everything it touches grows soft, heavy, and calm. The golden light moves to your chest now. Filling your heart with warmth and ease. It flows into your lungs, moving with your breath. Then down to your belly and lower back, releasing every muscle. The light continues down your hips and thighs, to your knees, calves, and ankles, until it reaches your feet and toes, surrounding you completely. You are now cocooned in soft golden light, safe and serene. Take a slow, deep breath. and let it go with a long, gentle exhale. You are lighter now, freer, wrapped in the comfort of this moment. In your mind, imagine you are lying beneath a starlit sky. The air is cool and fresh, carrying the scent of night blossoms. The ground beneath you is soft, cradling your body perfectly. Above you, stars sparkle like tiny lanterns in the dark. The night sky stretches wide and endless, peaceful and inviting. A crescent moon rises slowly, bathing the world in silver. Its glow feels protective, like a quiet guardian watching over you. Somewhere in the distance, a stream flows over smooth stones. Its gentle trickle is nature's own lullaby. A soft breeze moves across your skin, carrying whispers of leaves and distant night sounds. Every part of the world around you is calm, safe, and serene. You are a part of this peaceful night, held completely in its embrace. If thoughts appear, imagine them as light clouds in the sky. They drift in soft and slow, and with time they drift out, leaving the sky of your mind clear again. You do not need to hold on to anything right now. Your only task is to rest, to breathe, to let go. Take another slow inhale and a long, easy exhale. Notice how deeply your body has surrendered to comfort. You are heavy, warm, and safe. Your mind is light, quiet, and free. You are floating now in this gentle stillness, cradled by the night, surrounded by peace. Every star above you hums a lullaby, welcoming your dreams. There's nothing left to do. No effort to make, no direction to go. Only this sweet surrender into the arms of sleep. Good night. Rest deeply and enjoy tonight's bedtime story. I opened the door because something inside me had finally run out of excuses. It clicked in the lock like a clock that decided to start again. They told me Willow Bend would be quiet this time of year, and on the drive in I wondered if quiet might finally be the right size for me. The highway had unspooled behind my taillights like a long gray ribbon, miles of old decisions I would not be taking back. In the passenger seat, a cardboard box of hand tools rattled with every turn. A set of jeweler's screwdrivers, needle-nose pliers, a spool of waxed thread, wood glue that smelled faintly of almonds, and a little brass hammer that had belonged to my father. He used to tap furniture joints with it while humming under his breath, repairing chairs and radios, and occasionally my sense that things could be made whole. I had left a corner office without any corners, if I'm honest. Just polished glass and the feeling that everything I did passed through me without landing. My email signature had been a small, breathless paragraph. My calendar was a quilt of overlapping meetings with purposeful names that never seemed to yield a finished thing. I was good at it. That didn't help. Willow Bend announced itself with a wooden sign arched over the two-lane road, hand-painted ever so slightly crooked. Welcome to Willow Bend. Slow down, stay a while. The O in Willow Bend had a little willow leaf curling off the edge like a smile. I did slow down. I did, eventually, stay a while. But on that first morning, all I did was pull up in front of a narrow brick storefront on the corner of Main and Sycamore and take a shaky breath that tasted like dust and late summer. The building had been a barber shop once, according to the rental listing. Before that, a candy store, and before that, there were rumors. Something else entirely. A place that sold notions and repaired umbrellas and sharpened the occasional scissors in exchange for fresh eggs. The window was wide but dirty, and the inside was a murky constellation of motes that turned in the light when I opened the door. A bell above the frame gave a tired little jingle. It sounded like the idea of a bell, not the fact of one. I ran my hand along the counter, picked up a curled hair, evidence of the barber shop days, and laughed. "All right then," I said to nobody. "Let's do this." There is a thrill in claiming a space. My first act was ceremonial. I swept, then swept again because the first time only rearranged the dust. I opened the back door to let a salt-sweet current of air through from the river 2 blocks over. A faded linoleum checkerboard revealed itself under the grime. Black and cream squares, scuffed at the center where hundreds of feet had pivoted to leave. I pulled off the paper that had been taped over the front window and leaned the broom against the door frame while the town looked back at me. 2 teenagers sharing French fries on a bench, a dog tied to a lamppost watching everything with the intense politeness only dogs manage, a woman pushing a stroller with one hand and balancing a coffee in the other. I'd found the space with the help of a realtor who wore a denim jacket and used words like cozy and potential with genuine hopefulness. Small places have big feelings. she'd said when I hesitated, running my fingers over a water stain on the ceiling tile. They keep stories better. I signed the lease and drove back to my sublet that evening and dreamt of hinges. On the second day, I brought paint. The color I chose for the wooden sign made my chest ache a little. It was the soft blue of a cloudless morning, the sort of sky that persuades you to risk being alive. I spread an old sheet over the counter and balanced the board on two sawhorses. The words came slowly. The shop of fixable things. The letters were tall and a little uneven, like children lining up on the first day of school. Underneath, in smaller print, "We fix what can be mended, people included." I had written it as a joke at first. The truth slid into it while the paint dried. I hung the sign late in the afternoon by standing tiptoe on a rickety ladder that had surely seen better days. It took 3 tries to get the screws to bite. When I stepped down and stood on the sidewalk, sweat dampening the collar of my shirt, I felt something like a key turning. The sign moved slightly with the breeze. So did the air in me. Inside, I set the counter with a little tray for small bits, the kind that disappear unless you honor them. A bowl for screws and washers, a magnet for pins, a cotton cloth, a tin of beeswax polish. I arranged my tools like an apology to time. I found a grid of uptown fluorescent bulbs and decided to leave them off, letting the light from the window do most of the work. It felt kinder. The bell chimed for real the first time when I propped the door. A girl walked by with a violin case and glanced in. "We're not open yet," I said, then caught myself. Of course we were. The door was open. The sign was up. I unfurled a length of canvas and laid it like a runner on the counter, just to make the place look less like a room waiting for an idea. The first visitor came in on a question. He appeared at the glass like a breath. Small face, big eyes, a messy shock of hair that made him look like he'd been perpetually surprised since birth. He pressed his nose against the window long enough to leave a ghost, then stepped back and regarded the sign. His lips moved as he read, as if tasting the words. Then he pushed the door, the bell jangling with an enthusiasm it had held in reserve. "Hi," I said. "Can you fix a robot?" he asked without hello, holding a plastic figure at arm's length the way adults hold bad news. "I can try." I held out my hands. He placed it on my palms as if delivering a fragile truth. The robot was, in fact, fragile. One arm limp, one eye dark, a hairline crack along the chrome-painted torso. When I shook it gently, there was the faint rattle of a loose screw migrating inside. A tiny sticker on the side said "Rex" in a childish scrawl. The toy had done some living. "What's your name?" I asked. "Ben," he said. "And he's Rex. He used to light up and make a sound like bzzzt, bzzzt. But he fell off the porch and then he stopped. Mom said sometimes when things break, they're just done." He looked at the counter, then back at me, brave and trying to be braver. "Sometimes," I said, "but not always." I set the robot down on the canvas, which seemed to make the whole moment gentler. "Do you want to help?" His eyes widened, then narrowed with solemn importance. He nodded. I fetched the tiny screwdriver, and together we found the seam and worked the back plate off. Inside, a small circuit board blinked like a shy city. The battery leads had come loose, easy enough. The arm had detached at a plastic hinge, fixable if I glued with care and held it just so while it set. I showed him each part before I touched it, telling him its job and why. He held the small parts dish and watched as if he were memorizing a map back to a place he liked. "Do you fix people?" Ben asked suddenly, studying my face. The question landed right behind my ribs. I had written the words on the sign and supposed the world would let me get away with them. But here was a child, mystic and literal. "Not exactly," I said. "But sometimes when I fix a thing, the person who loves it feels a little better. Does that count?" He considered. "Maybe," he said. "Mom says even plants feel better when you repot them." I think your mom is onto something. I touched the loose wire with the soldering iron, and it hissed, then softened, then cooled into a gleaming new certainty. We glued the arm, and I set a clamp on it like a tiny bite. "Now," I said, "we wait." We waited by looking out the window. Outside, the dog at the lamp post arranged himself into the shape of patience. A mail truck idled, then moved on. A man in a cap with a puffball on top checked his watch as if a train might be coming through town. "Does your robot like any music?" I asked, and Ben laughed so loudly the bells shivered. "He likes songs with those booms," he said. "Like when you say his name, but it's a song. Rex, Rex, Rex." He drummed the counter softly with both hands, and I let the rhythm humanize the room. When the glue set, I removed the clamp with a little ceremony. We clicked the back plate into place. I pressed the power button. The other eye lit. We both held our breath. "Bzzzt," Rex said, obliging us. Because sometimes the world is kind even when you haven't fully earned it. "Bzzzt, psst." Ben's face did something a sunrise would envy. He clutched Rex to his chest and then, as if remembering something essential, he set him gently down, patted the robot's head, and composed himself into a person who had not just almost cried. "How much does it cost?" he asked with grave adultness. I hesitated, then named a number so small it embarrassed me. He pulled 2 crumpled dollars from his pocket and a smooth rock that must have been traveling with them. "This is for you," he said, pushing the rock forward. "For your thing." He gestured around, meaning the shop or the idea behind the shop, or the air itself. "Thank you," I said. The rock was gray and perfect and warm from his pocket. I put it on the windowsill and felt it steady something in me. Come back if he starts saying bzzt in a weird way. I will, he shouted, already halfway to the door. And then he was gone, trailing his voice, trailing joy. After he left, the room had a hum it didn't have before. I straightened the canvas and wiped a small splotch of glue from the counter and looked at the place the boy's hands had been. The bell chimed again, softly, and a man stepped in with a faded blue cap in his hands. He was tall in the way of small-town tall people, who are asked to reach things from high shelves and never complain about it. His shoulders had settled into their lives decades ago. He looked around with a familiarity that made me wonder if he'd worked here once. "You're new," he said, not unkindly. His voice held a pocket of gravel. "I am," I said. "I'm Grace." "Ed," he said, and offered his hand the way my father did, palm warm, grip considerate. "Ed Mallory. I walked this route for 32 years, carried letters here when it was Carmina's candy, peppermint jacks and taffy and the good licorice." He nodded at the counter. "Before that I came with my father when it was Mr. Horn's place. Man could fix a pocket watch by listening to it through the wood." He leaned his hip against the counter as if he were leaning against a memory. "Barber shop after that. Good haircuts, more gossip." "Then you know this place better than I do," I said. "Places remember us," he said, looking at the sign hanging from the front. "Even when we forget ourselves." He fished in his jacket and brought out an old envelope, the kind that had lived half its life under a stack of other forgotten things. It was addressed in looping script to A. Horn, with a stamp that looked like it had been licked by history. "Found this cleaning out a drawer," he said. "No idea why it was in my house. Should have been delivered here about 70 years back." He turned it in his hands. I thought, well, if the shop is opening its eyes again, the mail might as well finally arrive. He set the letter on the counter like a sacred thing. I looked at it as you look at an ancestor's portrait. "Do you want to open it?" I asked. He shook his head firmly. "No, ma'am. My job was getting things to where they belonged. What happens after that is between the letter and its reader, or the place that needed it." He glanced at the walls. "Maybe this room has been waiting to hear whatever it says." I picked up the envelope, thumbed the soft edges, and felt the paper's brittle kindness. "Thank you," I said, "for bringing it home." He nodded and looked again at the sign. "People included, huh?" "Ambitious," I said. It came out lighter than I felt. The words had been both a dare and a plea. "Not a bad ambition," he said. "My wife says people like having a reason to linger. We forget to give them one." He tapped the counter once, a gentle knuckle on wood. "You'll do fine if you let them." He told me that Mr. Horn had a habit of whistling the same tune every morning to test his hearing, that Carmina wore bright scarves and knew the exact day each child would show up with a quarter and change to buy candy for the first day of school, that the barber, Lou, kept a small library of Hardy Boys books under a chair for kids who waited for their fathers. He had a glass jar of combs that looked like a school of fish, Ed said, and smiled to himself. When he left, he paused in the doorway and touched the bell with 2 fingers. "Welcome, Grace," he said. "It's good to have you." The bell chimed back, a little brighter than before. I made tea in the back in a thrifted kettle that protested at first, then consented with an exhausted sigh. While the water warmed, I turned the old envelope over in my hands. It felt indecent to steam it open for content's sake. The address was written in a slanted intuition. Maybe it was a bill, maybe a love letter, maybe a repair part sent and lost. Mr. Horn had probably gone to his grave without reading it. I set it on a shelf near my father's brass hammer and decided that not every fix required touching. Some things wanted simply to be witnessed. By mid-afternoon, the window had become a kind of theater. People glanced at my sign and moved on, then circled back, then came inside to take a look, to smell the wood polish, to nod at the existence of something new that seemed, in a way, old. A woman left a lamp with a wobbly switch. A man asked if I sharpened kitchen knives. A teenager in a denim jacket inquired about fixing a broken clasp on a leather bracelet, and then lingered, eyes roaming the walls as if measuring the space for a dream. I wrote down names and phone numbers and what each thing needed in a notebook that still smelled faintly of the bookstore where I'd bought it. Every time the bell rang, a little square in my chest opened. Ben passed again and peered in, lifted Rex to the glass so the robot could see the world see him, and gave me a thumbs up. I returned it, feeling ridiculous and perfect. Between visitors, I wiped the counter, organized screws by size, and learned the way the light visited the floorboards in stages. The river air carried the low conversation of summer insects. A train murmured in the distance once, then again. I imagined following the track out of town and not stopping, then stayed. It felt like the first time I had chosen to remain where I was, rather than where I thought I should be. Near closing time, I stood at the threshold and looked out. The lamppost dog was gone, presumably leading someone home. The teenagers were replaced by an elderly couple splitting a cinnamon roll with the concentration of jewel thieves. The sky became the color of my sign and then leaned toward lavender. I thought about what Ed had said. People like having a reason to linger. What reasons did I have before? Deadlines, promotions. The sharp, false sweetness of being needed for the wrong things. I had opened the shop because I wanted to work with my hands again. That was the official answer. The unofficial one, which had been gathering like water along a cliff's edge, was that I missed the sound of someone saying, "This mattered to me," and offering proof of it. In my old life, things mattered only at scale. Metrics, targets, quarters. Here, a toy robot's $2 resurrection punched a round hole in the afternoon and let the light through. When I turned to go back inside, I noticed the rock Ben had given me catching the last of the sun. I picked it up and felt its small, quiet weight. My father would have loved this place. He would have pretended to be offended by my hammer and then admitted it felt balanced in his hand. He would have told me stories about the way a well-made joint looks when you've tapped it just right. He would have taken the envelope to his workbench and said, "We won't open it, Gracie. We'll just keep it near while we work and let it tell us what it needs." I set the rock back in the window and, on impulse, placed the envelope beside it like a pair of relics. Together they made a tiny altar, one to the future, the boy with his fixed robot and his drum beats, and one to the past, finally delivered. I locked up late, long after I'd intended. The bell's last chime stitched up the day. I turned off the lights and the room exhaled. Outside, Main Street softened to a slow hush. The baker flipped his sign to closed. The neon open in the laundromat flickered into a smaller kind of honesty and stopped. A bat stitched the sky with zigzags over the library roof. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at my blue sign against the brick. We fix what can be mended, people included. I had written it in a moment of reckless sincerity, as if daring myself to mean it. That was when I first felt it, a slight shifting in the air around the doorway, as if the building had adjusted a vertebra and sighed. It wasn't magic, nothing so showy, but it was something. A presence, maybe. Or the way you can sense when a room is ready to listen. I had assumed I was opening a shop. Perhaps I thought the shop had opened me. The next morning I arrived early and brewed coffee strong enough to rearrange the alphabet. I rolled paper over a corner of the counter and sketched a plan for shelving. I am not a designer, but I am a person who has learned the power of lining things up until they make their own sense. When I finished my sketch, a set of cubbies for in-progress repairs, each with a little tag, I wrote in the margin a list of things I was not going to do. Check my old work email just in case. Compare my pace to someone else's. Apologize for quiet. Under that, a list of things I was going to do. Water the spider plant. Learn the names of the pigeons who visited the lamppost. Say yes to someone, even if I didn't quite know how I'd do the thing yet, and figure it out with them. At 9 on the dot, Ed appeared in the window again, holding 2 paper cups with a defiant tenderness. "You looked like a cream and sugar person," he said, handing me coffee. "Am I wrong?" "You are heroically correct," I said, taking it. He leaned on the counter like it was an old friend. He brought news. The bakery had raisin buns today. The bookstore cat had caught a moth and was walking around like it had earned a Nobel Prize. The town council might finally approve the new bench by the river path. He had run a route for decades. He kept running it in his body even after retirement, delivering little envelopes of ordinary. "Any more robots?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "A lamp, a bracelet. A man wants to know if I can fix an old chiming clock." "Lose clock?" he said, eyebrows up. He used to set his haircuts by it. Folks liked knowing time had a sound. He sipped his coffee. "You'll figure it," he said, and I believed him. Mid-morning, a gust of wind shoved the door open and scattered a few index cards I'd been writing labels on. I chased them, laughing, and pressed the last one to my chest like a secret letter. It had the words "just because" written on it for no reason I could explain. I set it by the register. A woman collected it later in the day as if it had been meant for her. The afternoon gathered itself into a rhythm, a steady procession of small injuries and the people attached to them, a music box that had fallen silent, a ceramic bird with a broken beak. "My mother's," the man said, "not valuable, but, you know." A kitchen timer that refused to tick in the right direction. I found myself listening for what was unsaid, the slow exhale when I nodded, the way shoulders dropped when they realized I would not rush them out. Fixing, it turns out, lives in the quiet explanations. "Take your time," I heard myself say again and again. "Tell me what happened." Ben returned just before closing, this time with Rex in his backpack because he didn't want to be bored at home. He hovered by the window, tugged his mother's hand, and introduced me with the proprietary joy of children introducing a favorite tree. "This is Grace," he told her as if I were a category. "She fixes stuff. She fixed me, Rex." He flushed, corrected himself, and beamed. His mother mouthed "thank you" in the universal language of parents being held together by the smallest kindnesses. When they left, I watched them cross the street. She set a hand on his head without looking, a touch both absent-minded and perfect. The blue of my sign reflected in the storefront next door in a ghostly echo. I stood at the threshold and realized that for the first time in years, I'd gone an entire day without pretending to be anyone braver than I am. The inciting moment was not a trumpeted revelation. No chorus of angels, no line of customers out the door, no grand speech atop a milk crate. It was simply this. A woman paused on the sidewalk, peered at the words on my sign, read them aloud to the man beside her, and then, for no reason I could name, smiled at the door the way you smile at someone you're about to tell the truth to. They didn't come in. They stood there for a full minute, reading the words again, glancing at each other as if taking a dare, then moved on, their step a shade lighter. I felt it like a hand on my shoulder, This shop, I realized, was not only a place to fix objects, it was also a place to set down your hurry, to be seen in the exact shape you arrived in, to be taken seriously for loving a thing enough to carry it around until help showed up. It was a pause disguised as a counter, a noticing disguised as a repair. I turned the sign on the door from "Open to see you tomorrow" and stood for a while with the lights off, letting the dim blue of evening make the room tender. The spider plant in the corner had perked up. The envelope on the shelf sat with its soft authority, purpose fulfilled by finally being set where it belonged. The rock caught the last light again and held it the way a good friend holds a secret, with care, without hurry. I locked the door and tucked the key into my pocket and felt, to my amazement, like a person who had found the right-sized life. The bell gave a final, soft sound through the glass, as if to say good night. On the sidewalk, a breeze folded the day and slipped it into an envelope addressed to tomorrow. As I walked home, Main Street hummed its small, kind song. I carried the scent of beeswax and solder on my hands and thought about the language of mending. Tighten, true, sand, set, cure, stitch, bond. Verbs that ask you to stay. Verbs that believe in the possibility that a thing can be brought back to itself. I had opened a door that morning. The town had opened one back. Tomorrow I would bring flowers for the windowsill. I would buy raisin buns and tuck one in a paper bag for Ed. I would start the clock and listen to what the room told me to fix next. But tonight, I let the quiet be an answer. The sign swayed slightly in the evening air behind me. The shop of fixable things. We fix what can be mended, people included. I smiled at the audacity of it. And to my surprise, to my relief, I believed it. I didn't set out to be a confessional, but the door keeps teaching me otherwise. That morning, the bell over the frame chimed like a small bird learning its own song, and the first story of the day stepped in on careful feet. She was a slim woman with hair pinned back in a practical bun that looked as if it had been tightened in the mirror while she remembered something else. She held a teacup cupped in both hands the way people hold a candle in the wind, sheltering it even though the danger is mostly imagined. Her coat was sensible, the sort that can visit a cemetery and a grocery store in the same afternoon. "I'm Eleanor," she said, barely above the hush of the room. "I heard you might be able to mend." Her eyes darted to the sign and then to the counter, as if mending were something you could watch happen. "I can try," I said, and pulled the piece of canvas a little closer. "Come in out of the draft." She stepped forward and set the cup down. It was white porcelain with a ring of tiny forget-me-nots around the lip, one petal rubbed thin by a thumb that must have traveled there for years, maybe decades. The chip was small, no bigger than a seed, but it broke the circle of blue. I could see the hairline crack running down, delicate as a drawn breath toward the base. "It was my mother's," Eleanor said, and then after a heartbeat, "and then mine. I drink from it on Sundays." She cleared her throat like she had to step around her own words. "Since Harold passed, Sundays are long. I hold it, and it feels like we are both remembering the same things at the same time." She placed her fingertips on the counter and blinked once, twice, as if her body were adjusting to the truth of being here. "I'm sorry about Harold," I said softly. "There are 1,000 wrong ways to say it, and only one right way, which is simply to mean it." She nodded. "I brought it in my handbag after his service to the diner, and my hand, the strap, well, I wasn't careful." Her mouth tugged to one side. "I know it's just a cup, but it's also not." "Of course," I said. "Would you like to tell me about the chip while I take a look?" She smiled with a kind of relief, as if the request made sense to her body. I turned the cup in the light and held it near my ear. I don't know why I do that. The porcelain doesn't speak. But sometimes I catch the way an object sits with itself, and it helps me decide what to do. "I used to tease Harold for stirring his tea more than necessary," she said. "He liked the sound, the little clink. Said it made him feel like he was waiting for news, and that all news is better with tea." She laughed into her sleeve. "I suppose I brought this because I want the sound back. Not just the tea, the sound." "I think we can give you both," I said. I took out the fine adhesive, the kind that cures clear and holds the way two hands do when they've promised. "The crack is honest. That's a good sign." "Honest?" She tilted her head. "Cracks that lie hide where they begin," I said. "This one tells us exactly where it hurts." I set a magnifier on its small brass feet and invited her around the counter. "If you don't mind watching." "Please," she said. Her voice warmed a degree. As we worked, she told me about the forget-me-nots. Her mother had planted them along the fence behind a tiny house rented on a teacher's salary. She said they were small and brave, Eleanor said, the way she hoped I'd be. The chip had happened on the day of the service when a neighbor leaned in too hard for a hug, and everything inside her, everything balancing, said not yet and trembled. I brushed the crack with a whisper of glue, coaxing it to drink. We waited for the bond to know itself, an unhurried minute. This is what people rarely understand. Fixing is mostly time and company. "What did he do?" I asked, once the quiet felt friendly enough to hold the question. "Machinist," she said. "He could make a bolt out of a block of metal with his eyes half closed. But he never learned how to make coffee. Claimed it kept me useful." She smiled, then surprised herself by letting the smile linger. "He would have liked this place." I hope so, I said, and eased the tiniest amount of ceramic filler along the chip's edge, smoothing with a cotton swab until the forget-me-nots found their circle again. No hiding, just a gentle apology that acknowledged what was lost while letting the whole be itself. I handed her a warm cloth. Would you like the final wipe? She took it as if I'd offered a benediction. Her eyes glistened. Thank you, Grace, she said. My name on her tongue sounded like someone real. I poured water into the teacup from the kettle I keep on low for such moments and listened. A delicate clink answered, the sound Harold had loved. A coin dropped through time and landing exactly where it was supposed to. Eleanor wrapped both hands around the cup and closed her eyes. For a second, the shop looked like a Sunday kitchen. How much do I owe you? She asked, composed again, already protective of her gratitude. A tin of your favorite tea, I said. Bring it when you can. I wrote a note for her. Hand wash, no soak, one gentle life at a time. She tucked the note into her wallet and the cup into its nest of tissue. At the door she paused, touched the sign with her fingertips, and whispered, People included. That's very brave of you. Then she was gone, moving into the slow brightness of the morning. I polished the counter where her hands had been and straightened the magnifier. The bell rang again. This time it had urgency in it, not panic, but the firm step of someone who has decided to carry a heavy thing in public. Grace? The voice came from a man in an apron the color of burnt sugar. He had forearms like work does, and a kindness that seemed to be trying hard not to spill. I'm Tom. I own the diner down the block. Ed said you might be able to look at, well. He lifted a cardboard box onto the counter with reverence and lifted out a clock that had once sat above the register in better days. I knew it even before he named it. The Woodcrest Diner Clock. Green metal frame, creamy face, black numerals that you could read even as a kid with syrup on your eyelids and a stack of pancakes towering in front of you. It had gone quiet last winter. For weeks after, people glanced at the blank second hand as if time itself had become shy. My dad kept it wound every Sunday night, Tom said, running a thumb over the glass. He'd say, if people can trust the eggs to come out right and the clock to tell them the truth, they'll come back. When he passed in January, I tried to keep it going, but the tick got off. Then it just stopped. He swallowed. It feels like we stopped with it. Stupid, I know. It isn't stupid, I said. What's true isn't often tidy. I lifted the clock closer. The cord was original, fabric-wrapped and fraying like a well-loved cuff. I flipped it gently. The back was stamped, 1957. A tiny access plate invited the smallest screwdriver I own. Do you want a coffee? Pie? He asked suddenly, catching himself in the act of feeding grief. The lemon is decent today. I'll take a coffee later, I said. Right now, I want you to tell me about your father's Sunday night winding. Tom laughed softly. He made a show of it. Close up at 8, flip the chairs, mop with that mint-smelling soap Mrs. Carver likes. Then he'd stand on the step stool and wind, like we were setting the week's metronome. His eyes went to the hands, motionless at 4:12. The night after the service, I stood there with the key, and I couldn't hear which direction was forward. I took the back off. A small world revealed itself. Gears, a coil, a tired spring. "May I?" I asked, and he nodded, moving around the counter to watch. I let him stand beside me. We became a little workshop choir. The coil was gummed with the dust of years and cooking, grease that had left home and never found its way back. I laid the pieces on velvet, naming them to the air. Balance wheel, escapement, mainspring. Names that sound like life advice. I cleaned each part with a brush finer than eyelashes and a solvent that smelled like memory trying to be brave. The tick returned first in suggestion, then in practice, like somebody whispering from a far room and stepping closer. "Listen," I said, and put my ear to the open back. Tom bent too. We waited. There is a moment when repairing an old clock that feels like welcoming someone you love at the train station. You hear the footfalls before you see them. You know it's them because of the rhythm. The first true tick lifted the hair on my arms. Tick. Then the answer. Talk. The sound belonged to the diner, to the smell of hash browns and coffee, to the people who wait for good news over eggs. Tom's eyes shone. "Dad would say you need to hear both halves," he whispered, almost smiling. "A tick has no use without its friend." "Your dad was right," I said, and seated the wheel back into place. "Do you want to set it?" I held out the little knurled knob, and Tom took it with the care of a man adjusting his own heartbeat. He turned the hands forward to the present, then stopped and laughed. "I was about to set it to 4:12, he said. "Habit." "New habit," I said, and plugged the clock in. The second hand moved forward, cautious, then steadier. The room seemed to breathe differently. "How much?" he asked. "A pi IOU," I said. "For a day when someone in town looks like they're forgetting how to be here, you'll know who they are." He wiped his hands on his apron, nodded, and then, in a sudden gesture that made him look like a boy, leaned down and kissed the top of the clock's frame. "Thank you," he said, to me, and to his father, and to time itself. He carried it out like a newborn, the bell saluting as he went. For a while the shop held the echo of the tick. I oiled the magnifier's hinges, watered the spider plant, and wrote a note to myself. "Ask Tom about mint soap. Buy a bottle. People carry home the smell of being cared for." Just after school let out, a girl hovered in the doorway as if she were testing whether she was the kind of person who walks into places alone. Her backpack looked heavier than the books inside it. She kept her chin high in the way that makes it hard to see tears until they're already falling. "Hi," I said. "I like your sneakers." "They're dumb," she said, which is teen, for I've been looked at wrong in these before. She stepped inside anyway. "Do you fix cloth?" "Sometimes." I gestured to the counter. "I'm Grace." "Liv," she said after a suspicious pause. She pulled a folded bundle from her backpack, the kind of careful fold that tells you everything. A quilt, small enough to be a lap companion, came free into the light. A riot of mismatched florals that shouldn't have made sense together and somehow did, the way families do at their best. The edge was frayed, threads loosening like old braids. One square had come away from its neighbor and sagged like a tired eyelid. "My grandmother made it," she said, too brisk. "When I was a baby. Mom says I should put it away so it doesn't get ruined, but that defeats the purpose. It's supposed to be on me when I watch TV, you know?" She worked her jaw. "She died last month. Hospice at home. I keep thinking about her hands. I can feel the places where she had to take out a seam and do it over." She pressed her fingers to the fabric and inhaled through her nose like she was learning to breathe for the second time. "I'm sorry, Liv," I said. I wanted to reach for her hand and didn't. "Would you like to tell me about one of the fabrics?" She looked relieved to have an assignment. "This one," she said, pointing to a square with tiny peaches printed on it, "was a dress she made for my mom. There's a picture of her wearing it at the fair. She got powdered sugar on it from the funnel cake, and my grandma didn't even care." She smiled, then bit it back, embarrassed at being seen caring. "What would your grandmother say if she were here?" I asked. Liv considered, eyes on the quilt. "She'd probably make a joke," she said. "Well, that's what quilts are for, darling. Catching life and keeping you warm while it gets messy." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Let's respect that," I said. I took out the mending cotton, a shade between cream and moonlight, and a hoop to steady the fabric. "We can secure the edge without making it stiff. It'll still be a quilt, not a museum exhibit." I threaded the needle and invited her around the counter. "Will you help me?" She looked surprised. "I don't know how." "That's exactly the right qualification," I said, and showed her a simple ladder stitch, the in and out that looks like it shouldn't hold and absolutely does. This is how we tell the fabric it gets to keep being itself. We're not forcing it into a new shape. We're asking it to remember. Her hands shook on the first pass. On the third, they steadied. On the seventh, the room took a breath with us. We stitched in silence for a few minutes, just the sound of thread whispering home. When the frayed edge was secure, I nodded toward the tired eyelid of a square. "Would you like to decide if we leave the wonky part?" I asked. "It tells the truth. I'm tempted to honor it. But you can also ask me to square it up if that feels like peace." Liv stared at it, face very young and very old. "Leave it," she whispered. "I'll know where it is. It's her." We tacked the loose square with 2 tiny invisible stitches that only people who have lost will ever notice. When we were done, I smoothed the quilt in a long motion like you'd use with a child's hair. "Do you want a label?" I asked. "I can write what we did today on a little piece of fabric and stitch it to the back. Future you will be grateful." She thought about it, then nodded. "Right. Still used, still loved." She watched my pen. "And maybe, 'Hi, Nana.'" I wrote exactly that. She watched me sew it on, her hand fisted in the edge of the counter as if keeping from drifting. When I was done, she flipped the quilt over, traced the letters with a finger, and exhaled in a way that made my own chest unspool. "How much?" she asked, digging for a wallet that was really a pouch with stickers and a possibly cursed rubber band. "Bring me a story about your Nana's favorite snack," I said. "In writing, if you like. We'll trade." Liv nodded like I'd given her extra credit she actually wanted to do. She folded the quilt into its exact shape, pressed it to her chest, and glanced up at me just once. "Thanks," she said, which meant more than thanks. After she left, the shop was full of their voices, the clink of Eleanor's cup, the diner's tick, Liv's thread pulling a path through fabric. I sat on the stool behind the counter and let the stories settle like dust when a door closes gently. I'd imagined this work as a set of tasks. It was turning out to be a practice. Word spreads in a place like Willow Bend, the way rays spread through a thinning cloud, quietly, then all at once. By the end of that week, people were coming not only with what had snapped or stuttered, but with what had survived alongside them and needed acknowledgement. A man brought a toolbox that had belonged to his aunt, all the screwdrivers worn to a softness that made me want to cry. A woman with red lipstick and a laugh like a bell asked me to polish a brooch shaped like a moth because my mother wore it to fight with my father and to forgive him, and I need both options available. A boy arrived with a wobbly stool and a story about a fort. Each time I did the work, and then I did the other work. I listened while they put language on the invisible hinge between object and self. Somehow, in the mending, lives got lighter. I don't pretend magic. I know the difference between epoxy and prayer. But there is something about a small fix that reminds a person their hands are not useless in the world. Maybe that was what the sign meant to them when they read People Included. Permission to be the kind of person who pauses and tells the truth about why a thing matters and accepts help. Ed became a regular. Of course he did. He'd bring coffee in the morning and news in the afternoon. He reported that Tom rehung the clock at the diner with ceremony and a slice of lemon pie for anyone who wanted to clap. You could feel people's shoulders dropping 2 inches, Ed said, grinning. Tick-tock and eggs over easy. The town exhaled. Eleanor returned too, with a tin of Darjeeling and a story about how the cup, now gently mended, made the sound of the spoon tapping the sides feel like someone humming along. I cried, she admitted, tilting her chin at me so I'd see she wasn't ashamed. Not because the cup is perfect, because it isn't, and we're still here. She held my gaze. You didn't fix grief. Nobody can. You just made space for me to put it down long enough to drink my tea. Leave's note arrived on Saturday. She'd written about her Nana's habit of cutting apples into quarters and giving the best-looking one away. She said the best one finds the person who needs it, the note read in green ink. So if you ever find a perfect apple, it's probably looking for you. I taped the note to the inside of the cabinet where I keep the threads, so I'd meet it every time I chose a color. By the end of the month, the shop had a posture. People stood differently after a few minutes in here. That's the only way I know to describe it. They came in with shoulders like question marks and left with shoulders like sentences, not exclamation points, not proclamations, just something comfortable and clear. More than once, someone walked past the window, caught sight of the sign, and came in with empty hands. I don't have anything broken, a man confessed, eyes on the floorboards. But I wanted a place where I could remember how to stand still. Sit, I said. I put on water. I asked how he took his tea and if he liked the sound of clocks. He did. He sat. We listened. I started keeping a small bowl of smooth river stones by the register. When somebody told a story that asked the room to hold it, I nudged the bowl forward. Choose one, I'd say. Carry it for a week. Put it back when it's lighter. They did, solemnly, then with a little smile. The stones made a soft clatter when they returned, as if thanking each other for their company. Of course, not everything is fixable. A carved wooden bird arrived on a Tuesday with a crack the whole way through its neck, brittle and splintered by time and sun. I could reshape it, sand, hide. Or I could say the true thing. If we try to erase what happened, I told the owner, it'll go brittle again. We could try kintsugi, the gold seam. Not literal gold, not today, but the idea. We show the break and make it part of the design. She looked at the bird for a long time. Yes, she said. I want the reminder that we didn't pretend. So I inlaid a slender ribbon of brass dust and resin along the fracture. When it set, it looked like the bird had learned lightning. The woman cried, then laughed, which is a beautiful weather pattern. People began leaving things too, not broken objects, but offerings. A jar of buttons, a handful of watch faces, old postcard stamps. Someone anonymously left a little note under the door. You're the reason I started eating breakfast at the counter again. I found a sprig of rosemary tucked into the handle of the bell with a tag that said, "For remembrance and for roast chicken." The shop was becoming a table everyone could set. One evening, after I flipped the sign to "See you tomorrow," I lingered with my ledger open and the kettle refilling itself with its tiny sounds. I listed the day's repairs, and beside each, one line about the story that came with it. Not the specifics, just the scent of it so I'd remember. Teacup, Sundays are long. Clock, eggs and truth. Quilt, still used, still loved. The words made a kind of poem, the kind you sew into the lining of a jacket to carry bravery. I thought about the women I used to be, calendar-blocked, benchmarked versions of myself who tried to measure worth in output. Here, my output was measured in the exhale when a thing came back to itself, and the way light fell differently on the counter because someone had laughed in exactly the right place. It's not efficient, this work. It's adequate. Which I am learning is another word for holy. Some nights after closing, I stand in the doorway and listen, the way Mr. Horn must have, and Lou with his fish jar combs. If there is a hum, it's not electricity. It's the residue of strangers choosing not to be strangers for a minute. I have become a keeper of small sounds, a spoon touching porcelain, a second hand correcting the day, a needle pushing through cloth, a young person's breath steadying itself, my own voice saying, "Take your time." And yes, word spread. It traveled by coffee steam and over pie and along the river path where people walk pretending not to listen to each other's footsteps. "Go see Grace," they say now, which blushes me in ways I try not to show. She fixes things, but also I don't know. She listens like a warm porch. That's my favorite. I think of the shop as a porch I get to tend, a place where you can set down the thing you've been carrying and not be asked to justify why it's heavy. Sometimes when I lock up, I touch the envelope Ed brought me, the one addressed to Mr. Horn that arrived 70 years late. I haven't opened it, and I won't. Not because I'm precious about it, but because I'm content to let some messages be delivered simply by being set in the right room. In my mind, it says something like, "Keep making a sound that people can follow home." Or maybe it says, "We do the small things because the big ones are too hard to carry alone." Whatever it says, the room knows it now. Tonight I'll walk past the diner and hear the clock ticking through the open door. See Tom wipe a circle of moisture off the counter and grin at me like we share a secret. I'll pass the bench where Eleanor sometimes sits and watch her close her eyes around a mouthful of tea. Harold's clink keeping her company. I'll glance at the park and imagine Liv wrapped in her quilt on the grass, saying hi to her Nana in the only language that still works. A town is just the things we're willing to repair for each other, set down in a circle and name good. I keep the door open as long as I can. The bell says in its little voice, "Here, here, here," and I answer whenever I am able, "I'm listening." I saw the crack only because the light hit it just so. My own face mirrored in the front window, split by the seam where the old glass had settled imperfectly in its frame. For a second I thought the building was judging me. Then I realized it was telling the truth. I'd spent the day doing what I do best, listening while hands made work of sorrow. A wind-rattled screen repaired for a woman who missed the sound of summer at night. The mending of a child's backpack strap before Monday could betray him in front of a classroom. A lamp that belonged to a man's late sister. When it warmed again, his shoulders loosened as if the bulb had switched on inside him too. The bell had been a gentle metronome. The kettle had whispered. My sign had given shy people permission to step inside and put down what they carried. And yet, when I turned off the shop light that evening and looked up, there I was, a quiet silhouette held together by habit. On the street side of the window, Willow Bend moved as it does at dusk. Tom's Diner pulsing with unhurried voices, bicycles breathing past like commas, the river sighing over stones. Inside the glass, my reflection separated at the fault. On one side of the seam, a woman who could coax a clock back to honesty. On the other, a woman avoiding the thing that could not be coaxed, her own grief. My father's brass hammer sat where I keep it, its head catching enough of the streetlight to pretend at a halo. I could almost hear him humming, off-key, content, while he checked the joinery of a chair, light taps, pause, a satisfied, He had died before this shop existed, before I knew I'd need a place like this the way a wound knows it needs air. I hadn't told him I was leaving the job that made my name sound like an appointment. I hadn't told him I was staying with a man who could calculate ROI on a sunset. When my father went, I organized the hospice bills into a crisp folder and answered emails from a hospital hallway, and told myself that good daughters are the kind who don't make a fuss. Then, when the man left, gently, respectfully, with a voice full of words like practical, I did the same thing I'd done after my father, triaged the mess into tidy piles and returned to work. Nobody noticed the crack in the glass because I was the window. The bell gave a last tired note as I flipped the sign to see you tomorrow. Closing time always feels like smoothing a quilt over a sleeping child. One slow hand, one quiet breath. I stood a long moment with my palm on the door, feeling the cool seam where the two panes met, and my face split into its pieces. That was when he appeared, a shape beyond the glass, hesitating. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, then raised a hand as if he were asking permission to knock on the idea of a person. "We're closed," I almost said, then didn't. I opened the door instead. The evening followed him in like an uninvited but welcome guest. "Sorry," he said, stopping just inside the threshold, eyes adjusting to the low light. He was young, 20s maybe, but with the posture of someone older in the places that matter. His sweatshirt had the scuffed, soft look of a favorite, and his hair did the untidy work of not wanting to be a decision. In his hands he held a small wooden box the color of toasted bread. He carried it as if it were likely to change its mind and float away. "Come in," I said, because the door had already decided. He stepped forward. The bell's lingering vibration seemed to find his voice. "I'm Eli," he said, then glanced down at the box. I don't know what this is anymore. It's a music box. It used to play, it doesn't." I gestured to the counter. "I'm Grace." "I know," he said too fast, then corrected himself. I've heard. People say you, well, fix things." He looked embarrassed by the word and put the box down as if the surface might shudder. The box had seen some life. Small nicks along the lid, the kind you get from being knocked off shelves during arguments or packed in a hurry. The key at the side was tarnished to a steady gray. Someone had carved a tiny star on the underside of the lid, not skilled but tender. "May I?" I asked. "Please," he said. "If you can't, that's okay. I needed to show it to someone who wouldn't tell me it's just a thing." "I never say just," I told him, and I didn't mean the word. I meant the habit of pretending. He breathed out, relieved, and watched my hands as I turned the box and listened like a mechanic listening to a story already told. I wound the key gently. It resisted, stalled. A reluctant spring, or perhaps the governor fan caught by a sticky life. The cylinder inside might be dulled with the fine dust of years. The comb's teeth perhaps bent by one bad drop. All of these are ordinary injuries. Some yield to patience. "Who gave it to you?" I asked, because the best repairs begin with names. "My mother," he said, and then he stopped, and I felt the room lean toward him. "It was the last thing she gave me before she left. I was 8. She said it plays when you remember." I don't know if she meant it as magic or as a threat. He smiled without his mouth. "Either way, it used to work." He cleared his throat. "She came back once when I was 12, stayed a week. We ate spaghetti and watched a game on TV, and she told me it was better this way because she wasn't good at being the kind of person you could count on. I kept the box on the dresser and wound it at night, and it would do this little tremble like it was deciding to sing, and then it would." "And now?" I asked, though the question lived on the counter between us. "Now it doesn't even try." He met my eyes, then retreated to a safe middle distance. "It's not that I want to go back. I get that people have limits. I don't want it to be like she never tried to give me a thing that could keep singing after she left. Soft words do heavy lifting in this shop." "Okay," I said. "Let's see what's true in here." He exhaled like he'd been offered a chair after standing for years. I invited him around the counter the way I do when people need to be very near the thing that matters. The light was dusky, good for confession. I set the magnifier's brass feet on the canvas and loosened the tiny screws that held the music box's mechanism in place. The works revealed themselves, shy and complicated. The drum studded with pins, the comb aligned in teeth of varying lengths, the governor with its little fan that regulates the rate of release so the song doesn't sprint or drown. "Do you fix a lot of these?" he asked, voice smaller inside the circle of our attention. "Enough to know they don't like being rushed," I said. "And enough to know that sometimes what's stuck isn't broken. It's just gummed with life." He laughed quietly. Relatable. We watched the governor. I nudged it. It moved a fraction and sulked. I dipped a brush as fine as a moth's leg in solvent and touched the join, letting the old oil loosen and float itself toward forgiveness. While we waited for the solution to persuade the reluctant parts, I asked, "What did it play?" He cocked his head, listening to a room that was 15 years ago. I never knew the name, not a lullaby, something like... He hummed 3 careful notes, the bones of a melody. I knew it. A simple antique air that lives in a lot of music boxes, hopeful, circular, unembarrassed to be pretty. "I had one," I said, surprising myself. "When I was little. My father bought it from a church sale because it had a crack and he liked saving the underdogs. He said the song sounded like the way mornings feel when you haven't ruined them yet." "He sounds," Eli began, then stopped. "He was good," I said. And there it was, the ache, sudden and contained. He died before I started this shop. I keep finding his tools in the work. It helps. It also doesn't. We stayed with that, the kind of silence that teaches you the lay of the land. The solvent did its private business. The governor's fan let go just enough to turn, then paused again like a child checking to see if we were watching. I smiled at it as if it could feel praised and touched the tiniest bit more solvent to the pivot. "Do you ever get tired of having to keep things going?" he asked, eyes on the mechanism. But I knew better than to take the question literally. "All the time," I said. "Sometimes I want to call a friend and ask them to tell me what to do next, like I'm a piece of furniture with a diagram. But that's not how people come together. You can't torque a feeling to spec." He nodded, relieved. "Everybody keeps telling me to forgive, as if the clock will start again if I say the word." He rubbed his thumb over the edge of the lid. "I'm not mad all the time. I just wish I knew how to be the kind of person who doesn't carry a closed door around and hold it up in front of people who try to come in." Maybe the door is heavy because you haven't put it down long enough to see what's on the other side, I said. Not because I'm wise, but because sometimes my mouth knows before my mind does. He looked at me then, properly, and I saw the topography of a boy growing into a man without a reliable map. Beautiful country, uncharted, a few dangerous ledges. "What did you put down?" he asked, gentle enough to let me ignore it if I wanted. My reflection flashed in the window again, the seam. I could tell any of my usual jokes and let the moment pass. Or I could try the other thing. "A ring," I said, the word round and heavy on my tongue. He was kind. He was also measuring me. I spent a year trying to be the kind of woman whose worth shows up on a spreadsheet. When my father died, I asked him to sit with me in the silence. He suggested I call HR to see if bereavement could roll over because we had a product launch. I smiled in the practiced way of people who have made a story safe by telling it often. I took off the ring and put it in an envelope I never mailed. Eli's mouth tilted. "To who?" "My father," I said, "addressed to the house we sold." I looked at the shelf where Mr. Horn's unopenable letter lives. "I didn't send it. I didn't open that one." I nodded toward it. Some messages live by being set down in the right place and left alone. "I like that," he said. "A museum of things you didn't force to happen." "More like a coat rack for ghosts," I said, and he laughed for real. A light spill. The governor turned a full circle, testing itself, then another. I wound the key a fraction and the drum advanced, pins poised at the comb. A first thin note plinked into the air and vanished. Barely a sound, more like a suggestion. Eli leaned in so close I could see his heartbeat in his neck. He didn't blink. "Not yet," I said softly to both of us. "Let the oil travel." He exhaled. "My mom used to say that, not about oil." He thought for a moment. "About me." "Not yet," she'd say, when I wanted to be taller or we wanted to move somewhere with better water pressure. It felt like a promise when she said it. After she left, it started to feel like a trick. "Maybe it was both," I said, because love is not a tidy tool. Maybe her "not yet" was the truest thing she could offer and also the least. He nodded, and I watched the line of his jaw soften. The little courage it takes to allow an "and where you'd wanted" an "or." The governor turned freely now. I brought the drum closer to the comb and checked the teeth. One was bent a whisper, enough to make the note muffled when its pin came round. I lifted it with the tip of a blade so small it could peel pride from a story and not leave a mark. "Okay," I said. "Let's ask it again." I wound 2 full turns and set the lever. The governor fan unfolded like a moth's wing. The drum began to turn. The first pin struck the comb, and this time the note held. Another followed. and another, small chiming drops arranged by someone who believed that repetition is how beauty reassures the world. The melody stepped forward into the room as if it remembered where we'd set a place for it years ago. Eli's hand went to his mouth. He'd meant not to cry. He failed. Good. The sound a person makes when a missing thing returns is one of the reasons I keep the door open. It's her, he said, and then shook his head. No, it's me when she was still here. We stood inside the song. Music boxes are brave little optimists. Even when life gums them up, the melody waits intact, a patient animal, until you clear the path. This one offered itself without apology, each note touching the next without hurry. Across the street, the diner's clock answered with its steady tick, and I thought, this town is a chorus. Can I hold it? He asked. Yes, I said, and lifted the movement back into the box, tightening the tiny screws, setting the assembly with care. He gathered the whole thing to his chest the way 8-year-olds do with secrets and grief. The song continued, slightly muffled now by wood and memory, which is how music is supposed to live. Thank you, he said, when he could. You're welcome, I said. You should wind it less than you think. Let it be special, and don't store it in the bathroom. Steam is a liar. He laughed, scrubbed his face, and nodded. He looked at the sign in the window and read it the way people do when they need to believe something ridiculous. We fix what can be mended, people included. Does that mean me? He asked, trying for lightness and landing on hopeful. It means you get to be here while the thing you love remembers itself, I said. Sometimes that's all the fixing a person can stand in one day. He took that in, the good kind of medicine. How much? He asked, reaching for a wallet he likely always knows exactly where to find because he's had to. A favor, I said, a real one. When the song stops the first time after you leave here, don't wind it yet. Sit with the quiet. See what part of the music still plays in your body without the box. If you can bear it, write the first line down. Bring it to me on a scrap of paper. I'll trade you for a cup of tea. He blinked, startled by an assignment he hadn't expected to want. Okay, he said. Okay. At the door he paused, then turned back. You know that thing where you can picture someone in a place and it makes them easier to find in your mind? He gestured to the counter. I think I'm going to keep remembering you here. It helps. I put a hand on the brass of the bell, warm from the day. Me too, I said, and meant something larger than this. He left. The bell gave a small, clear chime as if clinking a porcelain spoon against a Sunday morning cup. The music box sang a few more bars in my hands before I set it down. The melody lived in the wood that had touched his palm. It nested in the air. It nested in me. I went to the window and looked again at the seam. For a long time, I'd behaved as though repair meant erasure. Smooth the line, match the paint, make the scar a rumor. Tonight, the line in the glass felt like instruction. I fetched the envelope from the shelf, the one Ed had delivered, addressed to Mr. Horn 70 years ago. I did not open it. I held it until the oils of my hands made the paper feel like skin. I breathed. I said quietly, like a promise, "Not yet is not never." Then I did something I should have done months ago. I pulled out my notebook, the one in which I write what each repair has asked of me, and I turned to a clean page. I wrote, "My father died. I left a man who loved the idea of me. I opened a shop where the bell knows my name. Today a boy brought a song he'd been afraid to ask to come back. It did." I added, smaller, a sentence my father might have said. "A good fix is 2 parts patience, 1 part witness." Outside, the river found its unending path. Across the street, the clock kept up its honest conversation, tick-tock tick, as if to say, both halves matter. I set the envelope back, placed my father's brass hammer beside it, and pressed my palm flat against the window where my face split in two. I did not try to line my features up with themselves. I looked at both women, one in each pane, and admitted they were mine. When I closed the shades, the shop entered the hour I like best, the one where sounds turn inward. I wound the kettle to life, made tea in a cup that is not perfect, and sat on the stool behind the counter, listening. The music box lay on the canvas, silent now, as I'd asked him to let it be later. In the quiet that followed its last note, something inside me did what the governor had done. It loosened. Not much. Enough to turn once around, test itself, consider continuing. Before I left, I flipped the sign back to open, and then, smiling to myself, back to "See you tomorrow." I tipped the bell so it gave one soft yes. On the walk home, I tried to name the song the box had played. I couldn't. I didn't need to. The melody was in my steps. It threaded the night between my ribs like a stitch you check with your finger and find holding. There are cracks in grace. That isn't the problem. The problem was pretending the light wasn't coming through them. Tonight, the light did what light does when it finds a seam. It entered. Something in me unlocked. Not a door swinging wide, but the simple yield of a latch changing its mind. I didn't open the letter. I didn't mail the ring. I didn't forgive anyone by decree. I did the thing I ask the town to do every day. I listened, I waited, I let the small music be enough to begin. It started with the sound of the clock. Not just any clock, the diner clock, Tom's clock, the one that had been silent for months until we coaxed its heartbeat back. That morning he carried it into the shop like an honored guest, and when he hung it on the wall above the front counter, The first tick landed like a stone in still water. The talk followed, and then, somehow, everything else seemed to move in time with it. The kettle began to hum on the back counter. The bell over the door chimed in a rhythm that felt intentional, and I realized the room had found a pulse. That was the moment I knew the fixing day would work. I hadn't planned to host an event. I'm not the sort of person who calls something a community day, without worrying it will turn into me awkwardly making small talk while trying to keep the tea warm. But over the weeks, the shop had begun to collect not just broken things, but people who stayed long after the repair was done. Eleanor would linger with her teacup in hand, telling small, precise stories about Harold while pretending to critique my tea-making skills. Liv had started dropping by after school, sometimes with her quilt, sometimes without, always bringing her quiet presence. Even Ed, retired postman and unofficial historian, had taken to stopping in twice a day, ostensibly for coffee, but really to see who else might be there. It wasn't just the repairs anymore, it was the staying. So I pinned a handwritten sign to the window one afternoon. Fixing day this Saturday. Bring what you want mended, things, stories, or yourself. Tea provided. I expected maybe 3 people. By Friday night I'd had to borrow folding chairs from the diner, a thermos from Eleanor, and a second kettle from Ed's neighbor. Saturday dawned the way only small-town mornings can. Slow, a little too bright, and smelling faintly of someone's bacon drifting in from 2 streets over. I opened early, wanting time to arrange the tables so there'd be room for both needlework and tinkering. I set out bowls for buttons, jars for screws, and a long strip of canvas down the center for anyone who needed workspace. The clock ticked above me, steady as breath. The first to arrive was Eleanor, arms full of a plate covered in foil. "Chocolate chip," she announced, setting it down with the ceremony of a royal offering. "And 1 batch with walnuts in case someone's feeling adventurous." She wore a scarf patterned with forget-me-nots, a deliberate wink to the cup we'd mended together weeks ago. "You're spoiling us," I said, moving to hug her. She shrugged, but her eyes were dancing. "If people are going to talk, they should have something to talk over." The bell rang again, and in came Liv, quilt folded over one arm and a pouch of colorful embroidery thread in the other. "I thought I could show people the ladder stitch," she said, cheeks pink. "It's, easy." "It's more than easy. It's what's keeping your quilt alive," I told her. She smiled at that, and I saw a glimmer of the girl she might have been before grief sat down beside her. By 10 o'clock, the shop was alive in a way I'd never seen. Ed had stationed himself by the kettle, pouring tea as if it were a sacred duty, while Tom leaned against the counter, telling the story of the clock to anyone who asked, and a few who didn't. People brought all sorts of things, a chipped vase, a necklace with a broken clasp, a scarf with a run in the weave, and one stubborn toaster that, despite our collective effort, refused to make peace with the idea of bread. Each repair became a story, and each story became a reason to linger. At one point, I looked up from restringing a bead bracelet to see Eleanor laughing, actually laughing, at something Ed had said. It was the kind of laughter that folds you in, like a quilt pulled up under your chin. Beside them, Liv was patiently guiding a man through his first stitches, her fingers nimble, her voice calm. Across the room, Tom was helping a woman replace the felt pads on the bottom of a chair so it wouldn't scrape her kitchen floor anymore. Every corner hummed. The physical repairs were satisfying, but the other kind, those were quieter. A woman came in with nothing in her hands, just an air of hesitation. "I don't have anything broken," she murmured as though it were a flaw. "But I heard you. Talk to people." "Talking counts as fixing," I told her, and set a cup of tea in front of her. She stayed an hour, telling me about the move she hadn't wanted to make and the garden she missed. She left with no new object in her arms, but her shoulders were softer when the bell chimed her out. The day moved the way good music does, shifting tempo without losing its thread. A boy repaired the wheel on his toy truck. Liv stitched a patch onto someone's apron. Ed told the same story twice, and nobody minded. The air smelled of tea and wood polish, sugar and conversation. Then, just before closing, Tom stood up from his spot near the counter. Without a word, he crossed the room and placed his hand on the clock. The ticking was louder in the hush that followed, its rhythm so certain it made the walls seem sturdier. "Sounds better in here," he said, glancing around, and I knew he didn't just mean the clock. When the last chair was folded and the tea things washed, I sat for a long time in the stillness, letting the day settle into me. The tables bore faint traces of work, a thread snip here, a ring from a teacup there, but the room itself felt fuller than it had that morning. I could almost see the shape of what had been made here. Not a repaired toaster or a polished brooch, but a net of small connections, each knot tied by hand. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an observer in my own life. I felt stitched in, part of the pattern. My own heart, long kept under glass, had been handled gently in this room, and though no one had set out to fix it, the mending had begun anyway. The clock ticked on the wall, not hurrying, not pausing, just keeping time as if the day's work were worth marking. And for once, I agreed. The heart was on my doorstep like a dare. I almost tripped over the small brown parcel, no return address, twine tied in an earnest knot. When I came up the shop steps that morning with a bag of raisin buns and the key in my teeth. The sun hadn't cleared the library roof yet. Main Street was the color of a held breath. I set the buns on the window ledge, cradled the box in both hands, and felt the way it wasn't quite whole. A faint give, a hush of something touching something it shouldn't. Inside, wrapped in tissue soft as old handkerchiefs, lay a ceramic heart the size of my palm, white, matte, beautifully imperfect, and split nearly in two. The break was honest and traveled at an angle, the way lightning chooses a tree. Whoever had packed it had tucked a note under the curve, for the woman who fixes everything but herself. Maybe it's time. I read it twice, and then, because I couldn't help it, a third time. The words landed the way certain truths do, not unkindly, but with a firmness that rearranges your posture. I looked up and down Main as if the sender might still be close, laughing into their sleeve, or watching me from a car with the engine running and the radio low. Nothing but a cat on the bookstore step, pretending not to listen. "All right," I said to the morning. "All right." I unlocked the door. The bell, a little braver every day, gave a clear greeting as the room took me in the way it always does, like a friend hiding a grin. I set the heart on the canvas runner, smoothed the tissue, and read the note again, feeling both seen and gently caught out. Then I put the kettle on, because healing is easier when the water is warm. I didn't pick up the heart right away. Instead, I did my opening rituals, flipped the sign to open, set the chairs straight, watered the spider plant, wiped the counter where yesterday's tea had ringed the wood like a small moon. I touched my father's brass hammer where it lived beside Mr. Horn's unopenable letter. The clock from the diner ticked on our wall, keeping honest time. In the front window, the smooth river stone Ben had given me held the light like it had been doing it all its life. The note sat by the heart like a hand on a shoulder. Maybe it's time, I breathed. I looked at the break. I recognized myself. Kintsugi, the gold repair, had been a whisper in me for months, an idea I kept circling and didn't touch. I'd used brass dust with resin on a carved bird's neck for a woman who wanted the lightning to show. I'd told people the story of the philosophy in my own words, that we do not hide the broken places. We hold them up to the light and honor what the fracture taught us. I meant it every time. And still, I'd kept my own seams quiet, pretending good work was the same as being whole. I fetched the fine sandpaper, the resin, the little tin of bronze powder that gleamed like afternoon in a jar. I washed the heart in warm water, the way you would a baby or a memory, dried it with a towel that had once been my father's, and set the two halves together to see how they wanted to meet. The edges clicked, almost eager. The crack was clean, no missing chips, no lies. "Okay," I said to it, to me. "We'll do this slow." I mixed the resin with the powder until it made a liquid that looked like a secret and smelled like beginning. With a slender brush, I painted the gold into the fracture line, not a smear, not a cover-up, but a thread. Then, with my smallest clamps, delicate jaws that know how not to bruise, I held the halves and let chemistry make its quiet vows. While we waited, the town woke. Ed tapped on the window at 9 and lifted a coffee as if toasting the day. He'd be back after his walk, he mouthed, because routines are a form of love. Across the street, someone hung a closed sign with a shrug that said it would be an open kind of morning anyway. A girl on a bike swerved to avoid a squirrel with the grace of a dancer pretending not to be seen. I kept one eye on the heart and opened the other to the door. "We're open," I told the first visitor, an older man I hadn't met, holding a radio that had forgotten its stations, and to the second, a college kid whose backpack zipper had made a decision in the middle of the night. Eleanor arrived on the dot of 10 with a small tin and an air of being pleased with herself. "Orange cardamom shortbread," she declared, and then, catching sight of the heart under its clamps, went very still. "Ah," she said, "there you are." "You?" I asked, half joking because the note had her exact humor in it, tender and pointed. "Not guilty," she said, smiling, "though I wish I had thought of it." "Who did?" "I don't know," I said, and realized the not knowing felt right. The sender understood something important. The gift wasn't the note or even the heart. It was the permission to mend where people could see. We drank tea beside the heart as the seam began to set, the gold filling up with itself, the line becoming both scar and story. Eleanor told me Harold had haunted her less aggressively the last week. "He's gotten better at being dead," she said dryly, and that she had started quoting him out loud again at home, which is a way of letting love be less sharp. When she left, she put a hand on my shoulder in the exact place the note had landed and squeezed. No words. Perfect. By noon, Liv wandered in, her quilt in a backpack this time, scraps of fabric peeking like shy confetti. Her bangs had grown out a little. Her voice had too. "What are we fixing?" she asked, stepping right up to the counter, all attention. "Me," I said, and it surprised us both with how easy it came. I told her about the package, the note, the decision to let the shop see me do this in the light. She nodded in the solemn way teenagers do when adults tell the truth without trying to make it a lesson. Then she took a seat on the stool, swung her feet, and kept me company the way someone loyal holds your tools while you work. Around 1, Eli came by, all shoulders and sleeves and eyes that had seen the inside of something tender and chosen not to shut. He had a scrap of paper in his hand and a grin he tried to keep from being earnest. "For the trade?" he said, placing the paper on the counter. The first line of the music box's song, drawn as a little melody, and under it, in his clumsy good handwriting, "Not yet isn't never." I took it in as if it were a slice of perfect apple. Will you help me with something? I asked, nudging my chin toward the heart. I want to put it in the window when it's cured. But first I want a name for it, so the people who don't know what they're looking at have a way into the story. He studied it, serious. Call it after, he said, because the before is everybody's, but the after is the part where you chose. We labeled a small card together. After. A heart repaired with gold to honor what the crack taught it. Please look with kindness. We included the philosophy in short. We don't hide our broken places. We gild them so they can catch the light. I added, people included. By late afternoon, the seam had settled into itself. I removed the clamps with the kind of gravity you use to lift a sleeping child and ran a fingertip along the gold, surprised at the way my body wanted to kneel. The heart was both exactly what it had been and entirely new. More itself because it admitted what it had survived. I placed it on a small wooden stand my father had made the year he decided scraps deserved as much attention as planks. In the front window, I cleared a space beside Ben's river stone and the envelope for Mr. Horn and set the heart where the light would find it every day. I told the bell, which is to say I opened the door so the town could notice. People did what people do. They paused, they read, they cocked their heads, reflected in the glass, and saw themselves split on the seam and made whole by it. A man touched his chest without knowing he was doing it. A girl lifted her fingers like she might trace the line in the air. Ed stopped in the middle of the crosswalk and crossed himself as if the heart were a small chapel and he'd been wandering for miles. "Is it for sale?" someone asked, because in America everything might be. "No," I said and smiled. "It's for staying." Word moved the way it always does here. Through the diner, the library steps, the barber shop turned hair studio where gossip and generosity braid together. Tom came by at 3 with a slice of lemon pie because the clock told him to, he said, and stood in front of the window with the easy authority of a man who has learned to measure time by kindness. "That's a fine thing," he said, nodding at the heart. "People will see themselves and remember to be softer. Eggs taste better when folks have decided to be softer." The shop changed a little. Or maybe we let it be what it had wanted to be all along. People started coming in with empty hands and leaving full of tea, of quieter breath, of the feeling that a room could hold you while you didn't quite know how to hold yourself. New rituals arrived and made themselves at home. Ed began a story hour of sorts on Tuesdays. Not for children, although children came, but for anyone with a good first sentence. Liv put a small basket on the counter labeled "Borrow a Stitch," full of pre-threaded needles for those whose eyes or courage were not cooperating. Eleanor baked more than any one widow should, but none of us stopped her. And sometimes she cried while the kettle boiled and didn't apologize. and people brought their own gilded things or asked me to make them. A farmer with hands like the ground asked me to line a cracked mug with a thin seam of brass so his mornings would remember his wife's laugh. A teacher brought a little clay dinosaur from a student's pocket, its tail reattached with a glimmer that turned the accident into a story. A young couple brought a picture frame that had fallen during an argument. We filled the crack with gold, and they stood shoulder to shoulder while it cured, as if the resin could hear the way they were choosing each other again. I started taking notes on small cards and tucking them under the heart in the window. Today a woman realized she could keep the ring and also leave the room. Today a boy decided to say his father's name out loud again. Today I learned that forgiveness is not a receipt, it's a porch light. People read them when they thought no one was watching and stood a little longer, as if their bodies had remembered something they'd been trying to forget. I didn't notice when the shop became a cornerstone. It's hard to feel a building lean into you while you're inside, pouring tea and replacing springs and passing around a tin of citrus lozenges like communion. But one afternoon I overheard a woman on the sidewalk say, "Turn at Grace's," to a visitor trying to find the post office, and the words eased into me the way warm bread does. The map of town had used my name without asking permission. I said yes to it, inside where it counts. The councilwoman stopped by with a formal certificate naming the shop a community resource, which made us both laugh until we had to sit down. But later, when the library posted a flyer for repair cafes and used my window heart as the image, I cried. Not because of the recognition exactly, because the town understood what we were doing and had decided to call it by its true name. At sunset one evening, a family came in with a lamp whose shade had been a cat's afternoon project. We patched it with a scrap of old lace and a strip of linen from Ed's late wife's tablecloth that he offered without warning, tears in his eyes like prisms. When it was done, the pattern of the lace fell across their faces like a blessing. The boy looked at me over the lamp's gentle glow. "Does everything get fixed?" he asked, a scientist in the making. "No," I said, "but a lot of things get company while they learn how to keep going." He nodded with the solemn satisfaction of someone who prefers accurate answers to comforting ones. I carried that home with me, along with a handful of tiny victories. I started writing to my father in a notebook labeled "After." I didn't mail the letters. I put them on the shelf with his hammer and the envelope. On slow afternoons I read back and watched my sentences become less careful. I bought a used record player from a yard sale and let it crackle the shop with old songs on Thursdays, which is the day the bakery sometimes runs out of cinnamon early and people need a different kind of sweetness. I took the ring out of the envelope finally and set it on the counter of a jeweler who listens. "Could you make this into a small, strong circle for my thumb?" I asked. "I want to remember what I chose." She did. I wear it when I mend. Eli came in one day with his mother. She stood in the doorway as if the room might interrogate her. He introduced us in a voice that trembled and held. She carried the music box, and when we wound it, the melody walked out of it like someone who knew they were late and didn't want to apologize. We didn't talk about the reasons certain people go or stay. We looked at the heart in the window. We looked at each other. She whispered, "Thank you." And I nodded, because sometimes 2 words are the entire language of a day. There were days I failed, of course. A camera I couldn't resurrect. A watch that refused to tell the truth for more than an afternoon at a time. A man who wanted me to make his wedding ring fit again when the problem was his finger had learned a new size of life. We agreed a chain might be kinder. I learned to say, "I can't fix this," like a midwife says. Push when you're ready. Not as an ending, but as an invitation for the next right thing to step forward. People didn't seem to mind. They liked being told the truth gently. It reminded them of the first sentence of a book they already loved. I also learned how to sit with my own weather. On days grief pressed its palm against my sternum, I made extra tea and kept the heart in my sight line. On nights I woke to the music box that lives in my bones, my father humming, a ring in an envelope, a door closing in a way that saved me. I let the melody play out without trying to wind it back. "Not yet isn't never," Eli had written. It became a small plaque inside me. The town, in its unsentimental wisdom, kept living. Babies came into the diner in ridiculous hats. The bookstore cat retired to a basket and trained his successor by existing excellently. The bench by the river path finally got installed. Eleanor and I sat on it one morning with orange cardamom crumbs on our laps and decided benches are another kind of repair. Places where you can put down the day and remember you have legs. On the anniversary of the fixing day, we did it again without calling it anything. People brought what they had. We mended, we listened. The clock ticked, and the kettle learned the names of the regulars, and Liv taught a new handful of hands the ladder stitch. Ed told the same story exactly the same way, and we applauded because part of being from a place is letting the refrain land with the same gratitude every time. At some point, a child pressed her nose to the window and kissed the glass right where the heart gleamed. Her mother blushed. We pretended not to see and let the room keep that small anointment for later. The package's sender never admitted themselves. Sometimes I think it was Eleanor. Sometimes I think it was Eli. Some days when the light catches a seam on someone's face as they laugh, I decide it was the town itself, assembling a message from all our pockets. It doesn't matter. The gift landed where it was meant to. The note remains in the drawer by the invoices, soft at the corners from being read when I need a nudge. For the woman who fixes everything but herself. Maybe it's time. It was. It is. I used to think mending would make me invincible in some small, ridiculous way. That if I learned the right solvent, the right stitch, the right word, I could outrun the next loss by repairing the last one perfectly. Now I know the truth that lives in the gold line of the heart. Mending doesn't make you unbreakable. It makes you able to break and be beautiful afterward. It makes you trustworthy to yourself. Tonight, as the sun dips behind the roofs and turns Main Street into a ribbon of copper, I stand in the doorway with the day gathered in my hands. The bell, loyal as breath, gives a final chime. Across the street, the diner's clock keeps its steady conversation. A couple lingers under the elm and decides not to finish their sentence. The shop smells like beeswax and steam and the invisible sweetness of people who didn't hurry their leaving. I walk to the window to check the small altar we've built without planning it. Ben's river stone, the letter that arrived 70 years late and doesn't need opening to do its work. My father's hammer catching a touch of evening. The little card that says, "After," and the heart, its gold seam catching the last light as if it has been waiting all day to do exactly that. The reflection stacks us on top of ourselves. Me, the town, the objects that remember, the first sentences of stories I haven't heard yet. The seam in the glass lines up with the seam in the heart, and for a breath, everything matches. I turn the sign in the door, the familiar swing of it, the way the word open flips and becomes a promise to tomorrow. In the glass, the reversed letters look like a language I've learned by living, the shape of welcome, even when the door is locked for the night. Behind me, the clock ticks. Both halves matter. In front of me, the street waits to be walked. I lock up. I slip the key into my pocket where it warms against the pulse of my wrist. Before I go, I touch the window with my fingertips, the place where my face used to split and make me feel like two separate women. It doesn't anymore. The seam is still there, of course. It's part of the design. But it feels like a line that knows its job now, to let the light in. At sunset, the golden light finds the mended heart and sets it softly on fire. It glows in the window for anyone who passes, a small lantern in the language of repair. I stand in that glow for a moment longer than I have to, breathing the smell of tea and polish and a life that fits. "See you tomorrow," I tell the room, and the room believes me. I pull the door closed. The bell gives one last contented syllable. The shop and my heart keep their rhythm fully alive. And that ends tonight's meditation. You're welcome to stay for a bit longer if you like. Have a beautiful night until next time.